Welcome to Syntax. Welcome to a brand new episode of the Front End Happy Hour podcast.
Welcome to this week's JS Party.
Live from Shipshape Studios, this is Whiskey, Web, and Whatnot, with your hosts, Robbie the Wagner and me, Charles William Carpenter III.
That's right, Charles. We drink whiskey and talk about web development. I mean, it's all in the name. It's not that deep.
This is Whiskey, Web, and Whatnot. Do not adjust your set.
What's up, everybody? This is Whiskey, Web, and Whatnot. We are your hosts. This is Robbie the Wagner and Charles William Carpenter III.
'Tis I, not the other much older gentleman that maybe you saw last week. I've got improved lighting. I was complaining about the bags under my eyes before, so if you joined the stream before, yes, I have creams, and if you moisturize, it goes really far.
Nice. All right, we have a special guest with us, Dan Blumberg.
What's going on,
Dan?
Hey, how are you?
Good. How are you?
I'm good. This is something different for me. This will be fun.
Yeah. Hopefully.
Would you like to give a few sentences about who you are and what you do?
Yeah, sure. I'm Dan Blumberg. I am a radio person who got into product, and now I host a podcast about product and building great products. I host a podcast called Crafted. Long before that, I was a radio producer and host at WNYC, and then I kind of caught the startup bug and became a product person at the New York Times and LinkedIn, and more recently have consulted to different startups and banks and et cetera. And kind of sort of by luck and happenstance, I launched a podcast called Crafted about 2 years ago, and now that's most of what I do is host that show and interview lots of founders and people who make great software.
Excellent. Nice. You forgot to mention your kayaking.
This is true. I do. I also moonlight as a kayak guide on the weekends. I live about 50 miles north of New York City, right on the Hudson River, and I guide kayak trips on the weekend. So if you're in the area, maybe not now because it's November, although it was 70 degrees earlier this week. So maybe, come out in a dry suit with me. We'll go paddle this winter. If not, hit me up in May and I'll take you on the water.
Excellent. Good to know.
Well, something you can bring with you to help in the outdoors is whiskey. We've got a super blurry picture here. Hold on. There we go. You want to tell us about the whiskey, Chuck?
Yeah. Wrote a song about it. Here it goes. This is the Woodinville Straight Bourbon whiskey. It's finished in port barrels. It's aged 5 years and then finished in those port barrels for an additional 6 months. This one here looks to be 90 proof and has a mash bill of 72% corn, 22% rye, and 6% barley. So not bad.
All right.
Very high corn. Might be a little sweet with the port. Who knows? All right. So you got to fill the glass, Dan. That's how it works. And
I got a big glass.
Or drink straight from the bottle.
Okay. Yeah. Just chug it right out.
I love, by the way, that you found a way to make whiskey an expenable item. That's well played.
Hey, you got that.
Yeah. As I say, you're on to us. It took 3 years, and somebody finally caught on.
I love it. You splurge on the good stuff.
That's right. Well, hopefully. I haven't tried this one yet. Don't get ahead of yourself there.
Yeah.
Definitely has a very sweet,
I'm smelling pears.
Okay. I'm not getting any
just
pears.
Me?
Yeah, I think just you.
Maybe it was the bushel of pears that I just ate.
Yeah, it could be.
No, I'm just kidding.
I get a little grape Kool-Aid on the nose. So, I don't know. I'm going to get in there, prime it up. Definitely doesn't have that flavor.
No.
For me, no. I'm not sure I'm picking up any pears either. Are there any particular kinds of pears? We'd like to get real nuanced with this, Dan.
I don't know that I've had enough different kinds of pears to be that specific, but it's got some harshness to it.
Yeah, the finish is a little prickly, I would say.
Yeah.
There's definitely some burn, some spice there. It starts out very sweet. It has a light kind of cola-like flavor for me, a little bit, and then gets kind of fruity, and then boom, knocks me with some of that spice. So it kind of threw me off for a second. It's interesting. I don't know. We've had a few of these that have been aged in port barrels. I don't know if this one, I guess it is port casks. For some reason I was thinking that they used staves and put those in. So they just get used port barrels and then they'll do a finishing process. So that's that last 6 months.
I didn't know there was whiskey coming out of Washington State, but here we are.
And then alas, here we are. That's a great point out. It says distilled, bottled, and aged, Washington State. So, interesting one. All right, so we have a highly technical and advanced rating system, so I'll do my best to explain it to you. It is from 0 to 8 tentacles, 0 being terrible, never want to have this again. Probably would have spit it out if you were there, though. 4 is kind of like, it's fine, middle of the road. 8 is, this is amazing, clear the shelves, I will drink nothing else. Robbie and I often tend to like separate whiskey styles just because we've had so many, but feel free to do whatever works for you, be it all whiskeys together, alcohol, whatever else in that vein. And Robbie will show you how it's done. So he'll go first.
All right. Yeah, for being finished in port barrels and being not super young, I guess 5 years isn't that old, but I don't know. It feels very harsh to me. I was expecting it to be sweeter and more mellow, and it's not. Not necessarily in a bad way, but there is some like weird thing that's punching me in the mouth that I don't love. So in terms of like other bourbons, I would give this, I think, a 4. It's kind of middle of the road for me.
Do you feel up to it, Dan?
Am I up? All right. As far as whiskeys go that I've had live on a podcast, this is definitely an 8. But if you want me to be a little less specific, I'm not typically a bourbon guy, so I do a little more Scottish stuff typically, so I don't have a great comparison set here. But I'd say it's somewhere in the middle. I'll give it a 5. I'll go 1 over Rob because I don't have the palate yet on bourbon quite as much.
And nothing wrong with that. That's funny. It was this close to sending you Japanese whiskey. I just couldn't find a particular
better
one.
choice.
Wow. Now in retrospect, well, it's okay. We're expanding your palate, so that would just been down that line again. But you win some, you lose some. For me, this is actually starting to settle a little bit on my tongue a bit better. It starts to get a little syrupy, but like less of that, a cola almost has like a weird, very light, like nutmeggy kind of something to it. And then this is actually getting more like a maple syrup or a honey for me in the beginning.
Honey, yeah.
Yeah. So I am warming up to it to a degree. It's not like blowing me out of the water though. It still is very sweet, very high corn. And then you've got that port to add to it as well, which gives it like a more fruity flavor to it. So for me, I don't know. I'm like with you, Dan. I think it's like maybe better than 4, but not like blowing me away. So I'll just split the difference and go 4.5 on this one. All right, we got to work on finishing this bottle though. We can't take it home. I know you've listened to a lot of episodes and we just crush it in this hour. And when you get to the end, it's kind of like that. Yeah. So
Chuck is of course kidding, but you can have as much or as little as you want. Let's go into a couple. Our hot takes are a little different this time, but
yes, I'm adjusting it for our guest.
Yeah. So we're leaning into podcasting kind of as a theme here.
Cool.
So Apple Podcasts or Spotify?
I'm using Spotify more these days. And actually they made a whole bunch of podcast announcements today, on the day that we're recording this, largely about video stuff. Speaking of kayaking, I actually drowned a phone like 2 summers ago. And I was using Pocket Cast. I've been using Pocket Cast forever until I accidentally drowned this phone. And when I had to reinstall everything, I just kind of fell into Spotify because it's just kind of convenient and to have all the audio things in one place. And also it just connects a little bit better to like smart speakers and stuff like that. That was like the one thing that Pocket Cast kind of let me down on. But it kind of bums me out that I'm kind of abandoning a podcast specific app kind of by laziness and sort of by default. And I think that, and Spotify is like totally ascendant right now. And I don't think it's mostly because of that. Most people have never heard of Pocket Cast, but Spotify is like really hoovering up all the podcast users, like listeners.
Yeah, they're killing it on all fronts. Like they have audiobooks now, and like they do video podcasts. Yeah. They're kind of saying like we're the only ones that are important. Like they pulled out of IAB recently, which is like the
advertising. I do, because I was a member of IAB when I worked for National Geographic and was in charge of advertising technology. So that's a funny thing. So basically they want to be able to say
listens can be whatever we say. We're not going to actually check if you downloaded it or whatever. It's like if you streamed it for a couple seconds or whatever, they count it totally differently. So you can't really trust their stats. But I think they're going to win that game and like get everyone else to do what they think, because they have such a like mass of people listening that I think
Spotify's really pushing video. Like literally minutes before I joined this recording, they made a whole bunch of announcements today, largely about like encouraging podcasters to do more with video. They're paying a bunch of podcasters, I think, to start putting videos on the platform. But one of the things that comes with, I believe, that comes with putting video on podcasts as a podcaster is it kind of breaks RSS in a way. I don't know if you guys know about this. Like there's kind of, this goes back to sort of my like lament about not using Pocket Casts. Like podcasting has been this like open platform because it relies on RSS and it's totally open. But with Apple and Spotify and YouTube, which is really who Spotify sees as their big competition is YouTube, it's not Apple. They are, I forget the exact details, but basically it's becoming more of a closed system. Like podcasting in general is becoming more of a closed system. And if you like look at your analytics of the show, it's good for a podcaster. You get much more specific data from a Spotify or Apple or YouTube because users are logged into those platforms. You can see like consumption time and things like that, that if you just download a file, like a download's like kind of a stupid metric. Like, okay, a file went to a device, but did anyone actually listen? And so Spotify and Apple and YouTube are better for that. But in order to be better for that, it breaks this like open system that I think has actually made podcasting kind of special in the first place, in that the analytics were always kind of shitty. And so you're just like, well, I don't know, I guess I should just make a good show because I can't optimize it. So let's just make it good. Add whiskey and it'll be better.
Exactly. So, that's it. It's like me talking, boring. Me talking post whiskey, much better.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like to me, I tend to agree. Like, I don't know that I love the way things are going, and I don't think video is useful personally. I mean, I guess the kids these days want the video or whatever, but like to me, a podcast is a thing you put on when you're doing something else. Like, I'm going to mow the grass. I need something to listen to. I'm going to listen to a podcast.
Yeah.
I don't want to have to watch it, but I guess you don't have to watch every minute. Maybe you like check in on the video every once in a while or whatever. But it just seems weird to me, like, that we're going to basically make it YouTube.
Yeah. I mean, I'm with you on that. The advantage of YouTube, you guys probably know, is the search engine. It's Google. The search is so good and it's so hard to find podcasts. That's the problem for a lot of people that YouTube solves. I'm the same thing. Like I don't have a need for video either. I am looking at you now through like a better camera and better lights that I've gotten all in the past like 6 months because I'm leveling up that game.
Right.
But it makes it more expensive. It makes it harder to edit. It's a pain in the ass. But also, like, I'm embracing it and, like, trying to be more capital C creator about the whole thing, which is, like, a little painful to say.
If that's where the growth is, or that's where the audiences are, and that's making a difference, I guess, like, you do what you got to do.
Yeah.
I mean, we very much embrace that, obviously. At this point, would I rather, like, not have good lighting and not do all of the things? Like you said, the expense to include all of that is crazy.
Yeah.
And I do my podcast like at a co-working space podcast room, so I have to set up and break down.
Yeah, I also have to set up and break down because I don't have a dedicated room in my house, and so I don't just leave the lights and everything up. It also hit me when I started like really caring about video. I was like, oh shit, did I shave today? Like stuff like that like it's so, or have I gotten a haircut in the last like couple of weeks? Stuff like that just kind of sneaks up on you is like annoying. Anyway, I can keep complaining about video as an old school radio person for as long as you like.
So it's a Spotify for you. And they really are kind of owning the space more and more.
Yeah. I'm also, by the way, on Android. So Apple Podcast doesn't really make sense for me. So.
Right. Yeah. So I guess while we're on the topic, since you mentioned getting a better camera and different equipment and stuff, we're going to jump around a bit here, not do all hot takes at once. One of the things Chuck did want to bring up was like equipment in general. If you're looking to start a podcast, like what is kind of the bare minimum you need? And then also like, what specifically are you using now if you want to like level up your stuff, just advice in terms of gear, I guess.
I mean, I can get into that, but I would say really what you need to get started is like a good concept of like what you want your show to be. And I think people spend too much time thinking about what microphone should I have. You know, it's just trite, but like it's really, really easy to start a podcast. It's very hard to continue with a podcast. And I view this stat as like actually a depressing stat, even though it sounds like I'm bragging or whatever, but like Crafted is like a top 2.5% podcast according to some like, you know, podcast metrics and things, you know, and the show has like, you know, a nice audience, but not an enormous audience by any stretch. And I'm like, oh, that's really sad for the like long tail of folks that, you know, it's so because if you publish like 5 episodes, I think you're already like a top 50% podcast, something like that. So just consistency, like pick a topic that like is interesting to you, have some unique angle on it. All that stuff comes way, 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 way before like what equipment should I have. That said, this is a Shure SM7B microphone. This is sort of the like among microphones, probably the most famous one. It's probably not the one that I would recommend to most podcasters because in order for this microphone to work with a computer, you need to plug it into like if I trace from the microphone down, or, like physically down, like there's a thing called a cloud lifter that's on the floor next to me, which is like a preamp basically, and then it goes into I have a Focusrite mixer, which is taking this XLR cable right here and converting it into USB, and then that goes into my Mac. So I don't think that's necessary for most people. The Shure also has a mic called, I think it's the MV7, is basically the USB version of this mic. And I would probably recommend that to most people because you don't need half of the equipment I just mentioned. It's just USB, it goes straight into your machine. So if you can splurge for like $250, $300, I think that's a really, really solid microphone. And then as far as like cameras and lights, I'm not really the best person to ask for that, but I can tell you what I'm using, which is I'm looking at you right now through a teleprompter. Actually, this is a recent addition to my setup, is a teleprompter, so I can look at you and look at the camera at the same time. Whereas previously I was sort of always looking up, or you never quite know where to look. And so the teleprompter and the camera that I recently purchased are both from Elgato, ELGATO. And then I have a couple lights. I have a key light here, a key light there, a key light there. And my setup is like, it's okay. It's good. It's a huge step up from where I was like 6 months ago, but it's this is not like TV grade.
Baby steps, right?
Yeah.
Everything's baby steps. And
Yeah, I'm gonna have to look into the teleprompter. I've been wanting to do that, like have my camera straight on, so it's like I'm talking to you specifically.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
so I'll have to look into that.
yeah, I was gonna say that versus, you know, just setting up an iPad with an arm or something. I don't know.
Yeah.
But yeah, this is kind of the same deal
Yeah.
where like I don't want to look into like a laptop screen, which is often what I'm doing now.
Yeah. So like literally the camera is like behind a mirror. You know,
Yeah.
that's so I'm looking at you through a mirror. The monitor is actually right there and it bounces off a mirror into my eyes.
Well, yeah, not bad. Okay. Well, you might have sold us on something else new. We're always looking
I
for more
gotta set up
crap
an affiliate
to buy.
link.
Yeah, exactly. Here you go. This is about the craft of crafted, okay? And we're working up there.
Okay.
So I think the hot take around that for me was, yes, like I do want to talk about like the craft of podcasts and different things along the way, but also like what about for your guests? Do you have kind of some asks or requirements for that?
In terms
Where
of like
they can
equipment
show,
and sound and video
yeah,
quality?
or they can show up with AirPods.
No. That's actually one of the few things that I do have I've done 1 or 2 episodes where things like were breaking and we're like, all right, let's deal with what we've got. I ask all guests to have a proper microphone, like a USB, at least a USB connected microphone, like not AirPods. There is a huge difference. And I've listened to so many podcasts where like I'll listen to like the intro of the show. Like if I see something on a LinkedIn or something, I'll click on it, I'll listen to the intro, I'll listen to the ads, and then they finally get to the guest and the guest is like, it sounds like, you know, they're like through a phone line or what. I'm like, no, or AirPods. And I'm like, I can't, I'm not going to listen to this. Exactly.
Kind of like that. Yeah.
It was just tinny and very high pitched. So there are really cheap but really good USB powered mics. Like the one I just mentioned, the MV7 from Shure, is far more expensive than I would ask a guest to get. But I have had many guests that previously I actually would just purchase it for them if they needed it. There's a Audio Technica, like $50 microphone you get on Amazon.
Yeah.
And these days I'll usually ask the guest if they have a good microphone, and if they don't, I'll give them a link to it and say, like, you know, if you give me your address, I'll send it to you. And they always, I'm like, and it's I'll put in the price in the email. Like, it's $49, and they're like, all right, I'll get it because it'll be useful for something else. But it's a little tabletop mic. and it makes a huge difference. So that's the one thing, and they have to wear headphones. Because even as good as noise cancellation, like AI technology is, it's not as good as just wearing a pair of headphones. So you don't have to cancel out the sound of the person asking you the questions. So those are the two things. Video, I'm much less precious about. Like it's, do the best you can. If you're backlit, I'll ask you to close the blinds or something like that. But I don't spend a lot of time helping guests with their video. But we do, before every interview that I do, spend a couple minutes, just configuring a mic. And one fun fact, I don't know, like I used to produce Morning Edition at WNYC for many years. And the canonical question, you guys may know this, to ask someone when they're like setting up their mic and getting it in the right place is, what'd you have for breakfast today? So I used to know what like everybody in New York, from the mayor on down, like had for breakfast, because I would ask them that, like, and you'd learn the funniest things of like, I just had a cigarette, or like, I had nothing because I do intermittent fasting, or like, whatever, yogurt, granola, like is the most banal but also revealing question.
Well, it's a kind of a good one.
So I still ask it because it's sort of a nice like icebreaker in some ways.
What if they say whiskey?
Whiskey. That'd be good.
Somebody said that, right?
Yeah, that's just what Chuck had for breakfast, not what most people had.
This is breakfast currently for me on the West Coast. I think I heard you in one of your episodes talk about, or you've mentioned that you have like a pre-interview also before having the guest on and recording.
Yeah. Almost exclusive, unless I've seen the guest speak at a conference or something, or there's tons of video of them out there. Even then, I still want to have just a 30-minute call with them where we just go over, like, I want them to know, I want to get to know them just a little bit, explain who the target audience for the show is. In my case, it's people who make software and sort of, and then I want to ask a couple questions that might not be obvious from whatever articles or videos or, LinkedIn pages are out there. I find that the pre-interview, though it can slow things down in terms of like first meeting the guest to actually recording, I find it makes a really big difference. And most people are game. It may take a little extra time, but I don't think I've had anyone say, I don't think I've had anyone decline because of that. So I guess the two things are sort of the pre-interview, unless I've met them in person and don't need that prep, and a decent microphone.
Yeah, I think that's reasonable. We have not super enforced that sometimes, and it's gone poorly a few times.
Yeah, you just find yourself fishing.
Yeah. It can be hit or miss, and then like sometimes what your expectations, even if you find some sort of content online, and then in this format, it just kind of doesn't translate well, or maybe they feel like they're on another Zoom meeting, or I don't know. Whiskey doesn't have the same effect on them that you're hoping for. It doesn't introduce that sort of release and casualness. Like sometimes you're just not a winner.
Yeah, the microphone thing, though, is weird to me that people don't care about it as a guest. Like, if you were like, hey, come on my podcast, I guess maybe because I'm a podcaster, I'm like, well, I definitely won't do it unless I have my microphone ready. I want to put my best foot forward.
Right.
But everyone else is like, oh, yeah, wherever I am at the time, I'm traveling abroad. Yeah, I'll just call in from my phone. Like,
yeah.
No.
Yeah, it used to be like way back when I was producing at WNYC and also Chicago Public Radio before then, we would just insist that people who were going to call us on a landline. Like that was before Zoom and Riverside and stuff like that. But it's like, you can't call on a cell phone. That's like the one thing, unless it's like breaking news and it's the only thing possible. But like, and that was back when people still had landlines largely, because even that's a huge audio difference, landline versus a cell phone.
That's true. Yeah, even today. I remember they used to have those funny, like, where you could plug in to the mic port and then it looked like, it had the mic here and you could talk into it, and I was like, here you go.
Yeah. When I was at Chicago Public Radio, this is 2002, I covered like on election night, I'd be out at like a victory, or hopefully for the candidate, hopefully be a victory party, you never knew. But we would literally install landlines. Like all the radio stations would install landlines at wherever the victory or parties would be, because we wanted the reporters to be able to call in and have some quasi decent sound quality. This is obviously very different today. Today you'd use some encoded technology.
You just record a TikTok and send that in, right? I think today it would just be like dancing. Yeah, it's good here. Yeah. I don't know. That's what the kids do, I think. I'm not sure. I don't have a TikTok. I don't watch that, so I can't be sure.
This just in, Whiskey.Fund is now open for all your merch needs. That's right, Robbie. We're hearing reports of hats, sweaters, and t-shirts, as well as a link to join our Discord server. What's a Discord server? Just read the prompter, man. Hit subscribe, leave us a review on your favorite podcast app, and tell your friends about our broadcast. It really does help us reach more people and keeps the show growing. All right, back to your regularly scheduled programming.
Yeah, I don't understand TikTok. Like, I don't know. I'm just too old for it. I can't do it. I've tried posting a few things on there, and unless it's like super compelling or like very like, even on YouTube, I feel like these days the content is very, I'm going to take this soap and carve it, or I'm going to, do a thing that's satisfying to watch that has no like value at all. It's just cool to watch. And that's the only stuff that tends to do well. I guess TikTok does have some funny things occasionally. I don't really watch stuff on there, but like my wife will curate some for me and like show me the good ones. I'm like, oh, these are kind of fun. But
So you were not dancing?
no,
No dancing. I think the only things I've seen from there are what like get cross posted. So there's that chef reactions guy who he watches like YouTube, like terrible YouTube cooking videos, and then like gives it a rating and then says, whether you try it or not. And some of them are like really great, some are okay, and then some are just weird, absolute garbage. And then he'll be like, 1 out of 10 still would try one bite. Stuff like that. It's really funny. I guess if you guys haven't seen that one, cooking things do kind of capture my attention, and I guess short form ones are pretty interesting. I don't even watch our clips, to be honest. Yeah, I don't know what they are. They go up there. Yeah, I know. You make them.
I'll just start posting all ones of you that are really terrible takes, and that's all we'll do.
Perfect. So still on the similar thread, although I know we have some other like slightly technology related ones. Do you have any advice, again, kind of staying on the thread around like podcasting and just content creation, just because a lot of people in the web and tech and whatever else are doing more and more of that. So there's a lot of interest there. Growing your audience. Do you think that there are any like, I don't know, top 3 table stakes if you're looking to like have a good show? Let's make that assumption that's already a good thing. I've got a good show and I'm trying to grow my audience. What do you think are the top 3 things you should do?
To grow, I mean, I'm going through this now. Like podcast growth is slow, even for most people, even in the best of circumstances. And so one of the things that I'm actually looking at right now is like, for me, is like the promise of the show. So right now I promise a show is a show about great products and the people who make them. I think that's a little too vague. I think I actually need to tighten that up a little bit on my show. I sometimes go on and I'll say like, it's for founders, makers, and innovators, help you make great products. I think I actually need to tighten that up. So what I'm getting at is like, I think you need to make a promise to the listener, to the viewer, and like keep that promise and make it really obvious for them that like everything from the show title to the cover art to the first couple minutes of the episode, like that's actually truly critical. It's like, but you have to get people to listen in the first place. So, starting from where people first become aware of the show or of the episode to help them click through, like make a promise that they can follow through. And then something that's really, really critical, like whether it's podcasts or any other product that I've built, like retention is just so important, and something I'm trying to improve right now with Crafted. And this gets back to the analytics thing of like what you can learn in Spotify and Apple and YouTube that you can't learn if someone just downloads a file and listens on whatever other like RSS powered podcast app. But in those 3 apps, you can see like minute by minute, okay, at second 0, I had 100 listeners, and then it's already dropped to like 90 by 30 seconds in. And then by 60 seconds in, I'm down to like 70. And like, oh shit, well, probably need to work on the intro to that episode. And so I think that's really important, is you got to hook people, and that applies to like social media, that applies to podcasting. Is like people have short attention span. You need to very quickly hook them. And so I think about retention a lot. Like you need to keep people from that first minute. I don't know if you guys saw the Mr. Beast leaked memo. Did you guys read through that? Did you see that and read? You know what I'm talking about?
I saw the announcement about it.
Like a month or 2 ago, Mr. Beast, a memo that he had written for new employees of Mr. Beast Productions leaked. And I'm not, my kids watch Mr. Beast, so I'm very aware of him. But effectively, it got into like, it's very, very, back to like the questions about like, what do you have to do to like succeed on YouTube? I think it's actually like required reading for anyone that wants to succeed on YouTube, just to know how he does it. Not that you should do it that way, but it's very, very, very focused on the thumbnail, like the static image like that. It's like if I remember right, the gist of it is like, if I can't imagine the title of the episode and what the thumbnail will look like, then we're not even going to go forward. Like that comes before anything. It's actually a totally interesting read, all about how for employees of Mr. Beast Productions, like to know like which part of the episode they're working on. If you're working on, he effectively says, the reason I thought of it is like, he effectively says, if you're sort of working on the middle of the episode, not that any part of the episode should suck, but if you're working on the middle of the episode, that's that's like the one part where you're like, all right, it doesn't have to be like it's not as important as the first 20 seconds, 30 seconds, minute or two. And so if it's going to drag at any point, and he doesn't like anything to drag, but if it's going to drag anywhere, it should drag somewhere in the middle, because you just need to get people through that first minute or two. And this is very similar to like stuff that, if you work on any new, product or application, especially mobile apps, like getting somebody to open a mobile app once is really hard. Getting them to open a mobile app twice is like almost impossible. And so if you look at like, they're called survival charts, in medicine, or like in retention charts, like day 1, 100 users, day 2, 65 users. You're like, oh man. And then it plateaus. Like there's like a steep drop, and then it kind of plateaus. So if you can arrest that plateau, like get that plateau to be higher, that's why the first minute or the first time user experience of an app is so important.
Yeah, I like how some shows do like the most important snippets in the beginning. I don't know that I'm ever going to do it, but I respect that people do it, because sometimes, there are so many podcasts that I follow. I'll start it for a second, and if I don't understand what I might hear in the next hour, then I'm probably just going to be like, well, I don't know what this one's about. I'm going to skip to the next thing. Like, people don't have much attention span these days, so it is very important to do something to draw them in within the first minute.
Yep. Yeah, and that's where you'll see people will use like cliffhangers and stuff like that, so just to tell you just enough.
Yeah, that's fair. That seems like pretty strong advice there. I think we could learn from that ourselves for sure.
Yeah, it is fun to watch the graphs, because like anytime we do an ad read or something in the beginning, you see it's like people are here and then nobody, and then they
at least they're fast forward. If you see them come back, that is the one thing. That's the weird thing with those retention charts, is you will see that like dip and come back if they're fast forwarding. Or you might see people like listen to a section twice. I guess they could rewind and listen twice. But
yeah, speaking of ads and like monetization in general, like what are strategies around attracting brands to want to do ads, or like just how do you make money as a podcaster?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I'd like to hear your take on this. I just came off a several-month partnership with Docker, which was a lovely kind of coincidence. So the history of Crafted is, the reason I said at the very outset that I sort of launched it by accident. I launched Crafted when I was with a software consultancy 2 years ago. That's not why they hired me. They hired me to be a product and engagement leader to work and help clients build better software. And they just kind of happened to mention my first week there, like, we're thinking of maybe launching a podcast. And I kind of raised my hand like, hi, I worked in radio for 10 years. Are we serious about this? And so that's how I like kind of rediscovered my love for telling stories and, and being on mic and all the rest of it. And I love podcasting because you get to just have people on, and you can kind of, once the microphone's involved somehow, you can ask them questions you can't otherwise. When I left Artium, I was able to take the podcast ownership with me. So I got the IP. And I met Docker, who were looking to launch a brand new show. They'd reached out to an old radio friend of mine who produces podcasts. And he was like, they kind of want the show that you just got. Actually, I didn't even have it yet. I was still negotiating ownership of the show. That's the one big monetization that I've had so far for Crafted, because it previously was, the monetization was, helping build the brand of Artie and the consultancy that I was with. And that's where a lot of podcasts actually do monetize really well. So like, we've talked about podcasts gaining a really large audience, and that's one way. That's a very, very, very rare case. A lot of podcasts do very well because you're just looking for a certain type of listener, and you don't need a lot of them. Or the podcast monetizes in other ways, in terms of it just builds your brand or your credibility or something like that. And so it's a rare podcast that needs hundreds of thousands of downloads per episode. Many B2B podcasts, like B2B podcasts, are doing well because if you have an offering that costs $1 million, like a contract with a software consultancy might, then you only need to like influence maybe even half a sale a year, and the podcast is more than paid for. And so for consultants, they make a ton of sense. So anyway, that's like one way to monetize it, is just like it monetizes outside the podcast. It's building your brand and it's helping you sell a very, very, very high ticket item. As far as like ad sponsors, I'm looking for new ad sponsors right now for Crafted. I did 20 episodes with Docker and we're going to move on. So I'm figuring that out actively right now. But I think having to get out of the trap of having to have a huge audience, it's being able to tell a story about, I have really influential people that listen to this podcast. Like everyone that listens to this show is a CTO and they control the budget of their organization and like frequently buy lots of B2B SaaS software. Like, okay, you don't need a ton of those people. Like if you have again, like if you have a couple of those, then that makes it easier. So that's
true.
Somewhat of the world that I'm looking at right now is like, and it's hard for me, honestly, because I have very wide interests and I like to talk about lots of things, and I need to, for monetization reasons, probably need to be really focused on like a certain type of listener and what they're looking to get out of the show. And that sometimes like there's a tension there for me of like going narrow versus going broad.
Yeah, you want to be able to like have that scoped demographic when you speak to potential partners and advertisers, but conversely, you might want to expand that circle to have this deep discussion and something else you find really interesting. Yeah. Isn't that always kind of the thing? It's like sort of sometimes it's the work you want to do and the work that pays you, right? And you have to I don't know. In the movie business, they say like one for them, one for me kind of thing.
Yeah. I've heard of that. Yeah.
It's almost like that.
Yeah.
I think related, like we've talked about this a little before, is like some people say be your authentic self. Like if you're trying to do anything that's not, you don't enjoy, then it's like not going to come across well. You're not going to, get listeners, whatever. But if you have a very specific, listener persona you're trying to hit, and it's not really what you want to talk to, but it will monetize, like, I don't know. How do you straddle that line, I guess?
I've more read about this, but I think, you don't want to get really good at a job that you don't enjoy. Right. And so I think that's the trap that like, and I know that actually from reading a lot of this comes from this guy, Jay Klaus, who runs a company called Creator Science, and he's become pretty well known in this space. And I've listened to a lot of his stuff, and he's talked about, and others have talked about, YouTube can be somewhat perilous because if your content spikes, like it hits the algorithm loves it. Like, it's like feast or famine with YouTube. Like most of your videos are going to get like, I don't know, whatever it is, dozens or hundreds of views. And then every now and then you might get like 500,000, and you're going to get a whole bunch of new followers who liked whatever it was about that video they really liked. And that video might have actually been an outlier for you. It might not have been the one that like you normally produce, but there was some reason. And so like you actually end up getting a whole bunch of followers that, and this hasn't happened to me yet, but like I've read about, and listened to others, like they get a whole bunch of followers and they're not actually the target audience. And so now it's like, do I make more content for them because it worked, they loved it, but they're actually not the people who are going to buy my whatever product I'm ultimately selling, or it's not who I want to be. But you can end up in a trap. And actually, I think with YouTube, like in some ways, like that one viral hit can actually work against you in a way, because one, you have to ask these questions, but two, once you have people who follow you and then they don't like your content, then that dings you on the algorithm later. And so these are kind of champagne problems that I don't have right now, but that is a problem of like staying focused on who is your real audience, what's really the story that you want to tell, and how do you not get distracted by, kind of one-offs.
Yeah, and I think, having a big enough audience to just like turn on monetization on YouTube and make that your career is like, you don't understand how high that is. Yeah. Maybe if you're trying to do that as like your only thing. I think you're right about like, pick a niche that you really can focus on and be like, well, I don't have the biggest audience, but I have like this audience. They control these decisions. These specific advertisers will give you more than just a general, YouTube is going to throw some random ad on there. That's never going to pay you much unless you have like consistently hundreds of millions of views on everything you put out.
Yeah.
Like your Mr. Beast.
The same thing applies to podcast ads. Like typical podcast ads are sold on a CPM, cost per 1,000 1,000 download, which is a big difference. Cost per 1,000 download metric. That's the standard ad metric in podcasting. I hope to not play that game because again, unless you become like a top 0.1% or maybe top 1% podcast, like the thousands of listeners don't really add up to enough. The typical ad rates are like $25 to $30 CPM. But if you have like a, highly select audience, maybe it's more like 100 or more. So that's one thing. And then also being creative with the actual advertising content that you create, I think, is another way to separate yourself. So you can do more than just, playing a 30-second ad. You can do host reads. You can have, this is something that I did recently. Like you can have the, like the CTO or someone from the company that's sponsoring you and have them tell a story that integrates well, that feels natural, to the show. It's still clearly marked, like, this is sort of my journalistic training. Like, it's still clearly marked as an ad, but it feels natural to the show. And I think that's another way that you can, charge higher than standard rates, is if it doesn't feel as much like an ad, and it benefits the company. And there are other things you can add in newsletters and social media plugs, and there's other ways
true.
to like
like
things.
Your scope is greater in that sense.
Yeah.
You're integrating it more, so you don't have that whole dip and come back because they heard it, they did a 30-second skip. Which, by the way, this episode is brought to you by. No, I'm just kidding. There isn't one of those. Yeah, those are all good points though.
Yeah, so we did talk, you mentioned a little bit about RSS, like video breaking RSS. What's missing from RSS now that we need to add to, like, get us all on the best footing across all platforms for podcasting?
I'm not sure I know the answer to that question.
There's not a right answer. Just like one thing that comes to mind for me is I think some people have added support for like a transcript in there, but like not every platform will do it yet. Right. So I would love to see that be a thing across everything, because right now we just like upload our transcripts to our website. They're there, but you can't see them if you're like I guess Spotify does their own. Maybe Apple does too,
I have definitely seen it. It's becoming more widespread, but yes, there is. It's not at all consistent.
Yeah, from an accessibility
and even like
standpoint.
basic stuff, actually, like in terms of like which podcast apps support inline links or bullet points or even stuff like that it's surprisingly inconsistent.
Yeah, I think Apple is like, I might be getting this wrong, but I think it's like if you're logged in, you can, like, the stuff is clickable, and if you're not, it's not, or vice versa. I went to look at it, I was like, none of our links aren't clickable, and then I was like, somebody explained it to me. I was like, oh, okay, so you're right. They are. But yeah, I don't understand it. It seems like such a basic technology that we should just kind of all do the same things, but we just don't for whatever reason.
Womp womp. And I have a non-podcast question, or there's a few things we actually like to ask our guests.
Sure.
I think we should take some time for that. If you weren't in tech, what career would you choose? Doesn't have to be something you already have a skill at, just maybe something you've had interest or desire in.
Probably I've talked about how my career is sort of straddled media and tech. So to the extent that media or storytelling is not tech, it's probably that, or it's just like be a ski bum or a kayak guide or
right. Get one of those
like
vans that you live on, but it's all tricked out and like it has a pull-out kitchen and whatever. Those like van life transporter vans. It always sounds good in theory. I've got kids, so
pull-out
it wouldn't
kitchen
work.
sounds cool.
Yeah,
it does. You just like slide this whole thing out, and you're like out in Utah, and you're cooking outside, and there's a beautiful backdrop.
Yeah,
sounds nice.
Something outdoors. I think I had a very brief flirtation with like some version of farming, and then I was like, man, they work hard. I don't know.
Yeah,
I don't know.
I don't know. If it's like that
I don't know
for
if that's for me.
Yeah,
I kill half my garden, and I don't want to starve.
Yeah.
Everybody that's in tech will be like, oh yeah, I'm just gonna go farm now or whatever. And it's like, have you looked at how much work that is?
Yeah,
because it is a lot of work, especially if you're like, you don't have the equipment to start, and like, you need a ton of land, a ton of equipment, a ton of workers. I guess if it's just for fun, if you've made your fortune already, then fine, you can farm, recreationally. But as a business, it's pretty hard to compete.
Yeah,
we've just lost all our farmer audience now. They're like, recreation, I'm out of here.
Yeah,
that's what they sound like. I don't know.
Well, during this super dark period of it being dark at 5 p.m., they have a lot more time for recreation right now. You can't farm right now.
That's fair. So are there any other projects or podcasts that you're really into right now? What other podcasts do you listen to?
I've been listening to a lot of tech podcasts. I'm actually, as a podcast curation app called Hark. It helps you like find new podcasts and sort of helps you like hear the best snippets of different episodes from different podcasts. One of the people there is someone I used to work with at the New York Times. And so because I'm helping them prototype like a tech curation thing, I am listening to a lot of tech podcasts right now because I'm actively pulling clips.
Like what, like syntax or like a different tech? Tech business, tech like the craft of tech?
It's like, the things I'm listening for, it's not for a tech audience per se, it's folks interested in tech. So it's actually, to be honest, it's actually podcasts I wasn't really listening to too much myself, but I enjoy Big Technology with Alex Kantrowitz. He's a good independent journalist right now. I like Hard Fork, also from Casey Newton and Kevin Roos, one independent, one New York Times journalist. Those are both good for tech news. I like Decoder with Nilay Patel. I like How I Built This. This actually sort of was one of the inspirations for my show, is How I Built This, but for people who make software. So at a level deeper. How I Built This, I find, is more the emotional journey of an entrepreneur than anything else. But I love the production value of that show. Acquired has become a total sensation. It's not, I don't know if you guys know the show. Like, it's not, not really for me. Like, it's one episode a month, and it's a deep dive on some company that you've definitely heard of, like Microsoft or of that level. And it's like 4 hours per episode. Wow. Deeply researched, and it's by these two guys, David and Ben, who started the show. I think the show's like 8 or 9 years old, and they started the show because they were doing this research anyway as sort of mid-level associates at VC firms. And they're like, well, we're researching company X anyway, and let's just talk about it. And the two of them started talking about it, and it turned out they were like sort of natural podcasters. But it's just the two of them like sharing research for like several hours. The show has just grown year over year and was featured on the front page of the Wall Street Journal this summer and became like a #1 podcast. It was already kind of maybe not on the way to #1, but like on the way. They've had a huge moment. They had a big event, like a huge live event with Mark Zuckerberg on stage in San Francisco like a month or two ago. So I listened to that show just sort of to be aware of it and what they're sharing, and just sort of to learn from their success, because they're sort of an overnight success, 8 years in the making.
Right.
Because, if you're gonna really make it in podcasting, that's probably actually how it happens. Is toil and then like hopefully it really pops. So I like that show.
Any non-business related things, like something like I listen to Smartless.
I do listen to Smartless. Yeah, I actually listen.
You can't listen to that anymore. It's not a Wonder podcast anymore.
Yeah, I was listening to that this week with Sacha Baron Cohen and enjoying that. Yeah, and Tim Burton. Good. Actually, the Tim Burton episode was nice. I love him. I love Beetlejuice. So that was great. So that's one for sure, but that's not really a deep cut.
Darknet Diaries. You like to tell stories. That's tech stories. Darknet Diaries. Have you heard that one?
I'm aware of the show. I've listened to it a little bit. I love the production value. I haven't really gotten into the show though.
Yeah, fair enough.
Yeah, it's pretty good. All right. Well, I do have a hard stop for dinner. So before then, what things do you want to plug before we end here?
I'd love for folks to check out Crafted. Crafted.fm is where you can find the podcast. You can search for it in the podcast apps. There are sadly more podcasts called Crafted that you will find than there were when I first launched the show 2 years ago. So that's kind of annoying. So look for my face, which is on the cover art right now. Dan Blumberg is my name. But the show is about great products and the people who make them. And I've interviewed lots of founders and makers, and we get into the weeds of what it takes to build great software. So that would be the one thing that I would plug. Yeah. And I thank you guys so much for having me. I've really enjoyed this.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. Thanks for coming on. Long time in the making.
Yeah.
Yeah, scheduling is hard. But all right. Thanks everyone for listening. If you liked it, please subscribe, and we will catch you next time.
You've been watching Whiskey Web and Whatnot, recorded in front of a live studio audience.
What the fuck are you talking about, Chuck?
Enjoyed the show? Subscribe.
You know people don't pay attention to these, right?
Head to whiskey.fun for merch and to join our Discord server.
I'm serious. It's like 2% of people who actually click these links.
And don't forget to leave us a 5-star review and tell your friends about the show.
All right, dude, I'm out of here.
Still got it.